Welcome back to our Visiting Artist, Scholar, and Lecture series here at Low Res. You all know me. I'm Elisa Schwartz. I am the director. And as is our custom, we're going to begin tonight with a moment of secular attunement, a moment to arrive in the room together, which will be a poem. This one is called Characteristics of Life by Camille T. Dungy. And it begins with an epigraph. A fifth of animals without backbones could be at risk of extinction, say scientists, from BBC Nature News. Ask me if I speak for the snail, and I will tell you I speak for the snail. I speak of underneathness and the welcome of mosses, of life that springs up, little lives that pull back and wait for a moment. I speak for the damselfly, water skeet, mollusk, the caterpillar, the beetle, the spider, the ant. I speak from the time before spinelessness was frowned upon. Ask me if I speak for the moon jelly. I will tell you one thing today and another tomorrow, and I will be as consistent as anything alive on this earth. I move as the currents move, with the breezes. What part of your nature drives you? You, in your cubicle, ought to understand me. I filter and filter and filter all day. Ask me if I speak for the nautilus, and I will be silent, as the nautilus shell on a shelf. It can be beautiful and useless if that's all you know to ask of me. Ask me what I know of longing, and I will speak of distances. Between meadows of night-blooming flowers, I will speak the impossible hope of the firefly. You at the candle, burning in only one chair at your table, must understand such wordless desire. To say it is mindless is missing the point. Now that we are all here, it is my deep, deep pleasure to introduce our visiting artists for tonight, Patty Chang and David Kelley. We are so honored to have them, and I'm going to read a little bit of their bios. Patty Chang is a Los Angeles-based artist and educator. He uses performance, video, installation, and narrative forms when considering identity, gender, transnationalism, colonial legacies, and the environment, large-scale infrastructural projects, and impacted subjectivities. David Kelley is an artist working with photography, video, and installation, whose recent project draws attention to the effects of global capitalism, resource extraction, and the shifting physical and political landscapes. Chang and Kelley will present a discussion on their collaborative and individual practices, which explore infrastructure, law, and development, interrogating the tensions between the state, the corporation, the individual, and the more than human. Please, a huge round of applause welcoming Patty Chang and David Kelley.
Elisa, thank you so much for inviting us, and thank you so much for that poem. I wish that we could remain wordless, but alas, we're going to have an hour and a half of words. Thank you everyone for being here, and it was a pleasure to meet some of you already today. I just wanted to give, before we begin, I just want to give a small overview of what we're going to do today because, as Elisa says, we both have individual practices and collaborative practices. So what we decided is that we're going to talk about 4 projects in the 1 hour. We're giving ourselves 15 minutes each. And so 2 of the projects are collaborative works, and those of you may have watched those videos. And then we're each going to talk about a project that we've worked on individually in the last, few years. And it's also, we're kind of taking it casually, so it will be a little bit of back and forth and, some movement around with the images. Thank you.
All right, I'll get started. And maybe just by speaking this title that I gave our talk, which is Spectral Fathoming Earth, Water, and Air. Been thinking about what's popular in sort of critical media theory now called elemental art or elemental cinema, thinking about the agency of the the non-human and how it also communicates as a form of medium, how clouds are a medium and light is a medium and water is a medium. And I think that a lot of the work that I do and that I see Patty doing and that we've done together has some ecological and elemental qualities to it. And just thought of an interesting way to frame it, to think about how other aspects of our environment also communicate. And one of them here, this project that we started called Flotsam Jetsam, this was done in 2007. It's an old work, but it relates to what we're going to be talking about. We had read in the New York Times about the USS San Francisco, which was a nuclear submarine that was flying blind, which means they aren't pinging their sonar. And unfortunately, they ran into a mountain that was not on their charts. And one of the sailors lost his life, and they had to scuttle the ship and bring it back to port. And it kind of got in our heads that this sort of interesting idea of the highest tech moment in human invention runs dead smack into a mountain that wasn't supposed to be there. It was an interesting idea, and we had been working a bit in China. We had done a previous project in China, and we started reading and thinking about Three Gorges Dam. Patty had visited it with her parents before it was finished, when it was under construction. And we thought about doing a project there about how to think about a landscape, the history, and a kind of personal connection to environment once that environment is underwater. And so the Three Gorges Dam, it was the largest concrete object in the world. You can see it from space. It created a 500-kilometer reservoir. So that, in a way, if you think about it in context of the submarine, it's sort of like the mountain got in the way of the submarine, and there's this idea of putting concrete in the way of a river. Like, how long will that last, and what are the impacts of that? Here you can see a view of the dam right there and the reservoir that it created through the valley up to that point. Do you want to talk about mouse swimming? Also, we one thing we said we would like to do is keep it casual, and as we often do while we're making artwork together, you know, it's a kind of constant back and forth dialogue, and so we'd like to have a dialogue with you. So if you have a question or a comment while we're talking, please don't be afraid to speak up, and we're going to kind of go back and forth as we go through. But I'll
Oh, I remember now. Okay, so part of our I think it's on. Oh, part of our research, our process at the time was, researching information about place, or thinking about mythologies, thinking about histories, and one of them was the relationship with Mao and his virility in relation to the body of water, in this case the Yangtze River, one of the most powerful rivers in the world. And he would do these, kind of like PR stunts where he would go and swim in the river and, to show that he was still a very strong leader. And he had this, he wrote this poem about the river, about creating a big dam, a great dam in the river, and about thinking about, future engineering and sort of harnessing the power of the water.
So one of the ways that we found that we might address working in a place, we are both American-born, and we were going to China to make this project about the Three Gorges Dam. We needed to have an inn, and we thought about sort of a kind of experimental way of working with documentary where it's sort of feedback filmmaking, where you have the subject that you're working with also write the script and sort of collaborate. And so one of the things we thought we could do when thinking about submersion and what's below the surface of the water was the kind of the unconscious. And we started thinking about, psychodrama, a kind of group therapy type work that was done in the 60s where people would use acting and performance and filmmaking as a kind of corollary to the therapeutic techniques so that people could see themselves represented and then understand how they're behaving. And oftentimes professional actors would be mixed in with the subjects who were going through therapy. So we, together with our local producer, got in touch with an opera company, a kind of amateur Chinese opera company in the town, Yichang, where the dam is, and asked if they would collaborate with us. And we started our casting with them by interviewing them about their dreams, to tell us their dream narratives. And we recorded that, and that helped us cast who we wanted to, and also write our script at the same time. And so we then worked with them to develop the story, and then they performed some of their own dream narratives for the film as a way to tell the story of the kind of the feeling and experience and the unconscious experience of having the world's largest dam built in your backyard. And so you might recognize this, playing with that idea of kind of therapeutic theater. We brought the submarine into it from the USS San Francisco and built a half of a submarine that we would put on a boat to take over the dam locks into the reservoir, and then it might be a vehicle that we could use our imagination to explore what's been submerged by the water.
Yeah, and we were thinking about 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and there's this scene in the book where, in the main salon, there's a window that's cut out, and they don't specify what shape it is. They kind of just say in the book it's oblong. It's a Jules Verne book, and there's one pivotal scene where they're fighting a warship, and the ship sinks, and so all the soldiers, are falling into the water and sinking down into the depths where the submarine is, and the people that are on the submarine are watching them sort of falling through the water, and can only see and not help them, not get to them. So it's, in a way, thinking about the technology of the submarine, and how it is a vehicle of seeing.
And I think we were interested also in the kind of the political context of this person who is sort of reacting to global trade and capitalism in the world and technology, and interestingly, there's a new 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea coming out where the Dr. What's his name? I want to say Dr. Zhivago, but I'm forgetting the name of the main character. Nemo, yeah, Captain Nemo is portrayed as a colonial Indian subject, and it's a kind of a counter to British colonialism. So I think it'll be an interesting film to watch in that adaptation. The other thing just to say is that the idea of the submarine was to play with this idea of the, behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, behind the camera, in front of the camera, to have a kind of Brechtian distanciation in the way we made the film. So every shot that we did in the film, we had two cameras running, and we would have one sort of behind the scenes, and so we would keep rolling while the actors were warming up or while they were talking to each other and socializing, and that allowed us to sort of cut in between the kind of quotidian banality of being on a film set, but then also have the staged performances that we had. So that was an intentional gesture, both in the set and the way the script was designed. Here's one of those propaganda posters of Mao's strength swimming in the river, and then that sort of serendipitously happened. There was a little island in the middle of the Yangtze River in Yichang, and that is a place where we saw a lot of locals swimming, and we thought that would be a nice place to park the boat and do some shots. And the day when we were filming, a group of swimmers happened to come through the camera right when we were rolling, so it was sort of this beautiful moment. All those people you see in the frame were not hired actors, but just local swimmers. So there's still this tradition of people going out and swimming in the river. And this one, just to give you, is the only little sense of what the video.
就是想象。
从某种意义上说，它是一种记忆的开始，一种你可以去讲述，但是却不能去的地方。
城市的淹没是真实的，想象的下意识的讲述它是抽象的。那么，为了简单的丧失或者是时间的流逝而伤心，又是什么呢？
So we also had a photo series that was part of the project, and we kind of thought about it almost like, you know, a Hollywood franchise film will have like all the big actors sort of have their characters and they have their own posters. So we kind of staged tableau scenes from the film. So this was our captain with going bathing in the river, the captain of the boat. This was from one of the dream sequences. A flight attendant was a dream of one of the people's, one of the actors. Yeah, and then the tiger. And then this was the flight attendant as the boat was going through the ship locks, just to give you a sense of the photo series that went along with the videos. Do you want more to say?
Well, I guess I just wanted to, you know, when we were choosing the works that we would have you watch, you know, sort of just leading up to us discussing things, we'd wanted to show the new project, which is the Stray Dog Hydrophobia, about deep sea mining. And we were like, well, what's another work that we should show? And so we were talking just a little earlier about like, why did we choose to pair these two together? And I mean, I think there's a couple of reasons. And one is thinking about this idea of, you know, speculation and, you know, a space, in this case, you know, the river that's been flooded and all of the archaeological sites, all the, you know, historical villages that have been there for generations and generations that'll never, you know, resurface or be visited. You know, the speculation of, you know, what happens to these places once they are invisible to us, once they are, you know, not a place that we can visit and tangibly, you know, experience or touch anymore. And then the other one is also just the process that we developed working. We made one other project before this, Shangri-La, where, you know, like, we kind of entered into the project not knowing what would happen, not having any plan whatsoever. So starting from the place of complete, like, you know, like a baby, right? Like having no history, having like no idea of where it's going, but just, you know, trusting that we would be in this place at this moment and observe, experience, listen, and, you know, be attentive to what's present and to respond to that in some way. And so this project, we were gonna do that, and it was gonna be a little bit, quote unquote, bigger. So we hired our friend who was a producer at that time, who made documentary videos or you know, made films, helped people make films. And he's like, you have to have a script because I won't be able to hire anyone unless you give us a script. And nobody will agree to go with you to this place. So then we ended up making a script. It was kind of loose, but we put it down, you know. But as you can see, for those of you who saw the video, you know, as the homework, that, you know, there's a lot of looseness. There's a lot of things that seem almost spontaneous, like those swimmers, you know, that are kind of retained. And so, so I just want to put that out there where, you know, like, I guess a starting point, like just a starting point of unknowing and where that leads us. Yeah.
I'll add one thing that kind of relates to your first point, which is, and what might connect these two things. So later we'll tell you about this project, Stray Dog Hydrophobia, which is about the possibility of the beginning of deep sea mining the world's oceans for transition minerals. And it's at a scale that's unimaginable, and I think that's maybe a connection too, that like, infrastructure that's at this scale becomes a kind of hyper object where you can't even grasp what its effect is on you and your environment and the people around you and your emotions. And so that's the challenge, I think, for us, is that when you deal with something that's that big, how do you even begin to represent it? So that's just a question.
And I think it relates to that actor's last line about talking about abstraction and loss and sadness, right? The swimmers on the beach.
So speaking of, I got interested in mining. I think there's been an element of my work over the years. My father worked in mining. He was a salesman for a company that produced buckets and chain and equipment for mines in the western United States for coal and uranium and different things. And, you know, as your upbringing often influences the things that you're asked questions about, I think I started asking questions about minerals. And as rare earth elements came more and more into the common discourse as we started doing this electrical transition to the green economy, building electric cars and building wind turbines and thinking about reducing carbon to respond to climate change, I was wondering, well, where do these come from? I want to know. I want to go there, right? And so I got interested in this story about how China got to the position where it produces 95% of the world's rare earth elements. Like, how did that monopoly happen? And so what you see here is a picture of a map of China, and you can see Beijing right there, the most popular common area. But if you go due west of Beijing, you get to the autonomous region. It's not a province. You know, a lot of China's provinces. It's an autonomous region because it used to have an ethnic majority of ethnically Mongolian and Tibetan Buddhist people living there. So it's inner Mongolia. It's not. There's a country of Mongolia for those of you who don't know about that, but then the Inner Mongolia is a region within China that was formed after the war and was a big place for mining and steel production. Here's a picture from the 50s of Baogong steel mill, where a lot of iron ore was processed to build cars and buildings and tanks and weapons and so forth. Later in the 70s, as Deng Xiaoping was trying to liberalize the economy, there was the vice premier called Fang Yi who saw the future in rare earth elements, and so got the economy in Inner Mongolia to start processing the ore for rare earth elements, and so that began in the 70s. And this is an aerial view of the Banyan Obo, one of the largest rare earth open pit mines in the world. And you can sort of see over here is the tailing pond. This is where they dump a lot of the tailings. And these are two mine sites. And it's interesting, as I learned about it, it became interesting that at the same time, Nixon was the president of the United States. Here's a picture of him signing the Clean Air Act. Nixon was responsible for the EPA, the Environmental Protection Association in the United States. And what that meant was that companies that were polluting suddenly had to be responsible for the waste they were dumping. And so an industry like rare earth elements, which the biggest mine was in California, where we live on the border with Nevada on the way to Las Vegas. It's called Mountain Pass. And that mine, to separate, you have to use a lot of acid to separate the ore. And then there's a lot of radioactive thorium and uranium when you do it. And so it has a big environmental impact. So all that ore got offshored to China. The US offshored its chemical waste to China, and China accepted that and sort of took that hit. And of course, Nixon was the president known for opening up China to the west, right? And as a result, the Chinese gave him Ling Ling and Sing Sing, the two panda bears that joined the Washington Zoo. So it's just kind of an interesting moment of opening up, but also this exchange that happened. And I think it's interesting now too, because it's related to what's happening, with Trump and the trade war with China with regards to these minerals. So the minerals produce a lot of waste, and there's environmental impacts. A lot to the pastoralist communities, the formerly nomadic Mongolian communities in that area that graze sheep and move through the landscape now are having to deal with land that's contaminated by the production of this. So it's a kind of irony that's really challenging to deal with, and we like to think that the green economy or the blue economy would be something that's a better choice than more carbon fossil fuels, but everything has its cost, I think, and making carb additive is not a clean process. So I'll kind of jump into a tangent here to get into my project and my process. So as I was researching this, I learned that I was contacting folks in Inner Mongolia, actually through Patty's cousin is married to a Chinese woman from Inner Mongolia, and she offered to allow me to contact her family there to see if they could help when I went on my production. And I started talking to them about it. This is in 16. When were you in Hong Kong? 2018. Okay, yeah. So 2018, China was very different than when we made Flotsam Jetsam, because when we made Flotsam Jetsam, it was Hu Jintao was the premier, and now it's obviously Xi Jinping, and there was a kind of regression in terms of people sort of self-censoring and a lot of fear about criticism. And so when I told the family friends that I wanted to do a project about rare earth elements, they told me not to call them, that they didn't want anything to do with me. And so I realized, wow, this must be a very sensitive subject here. If they're, somebody I know doesn't even want to talk about it, And so I had to start to shape how I was going to come to the project. And so I started thinking, well, if I can't go to the mine and do these more documentary, direct, project, maybe I could do something that's a bit out of left field, but still relates to it. So I started thinking about all the promise of the economy, of the green economy, of the new middle class in this area of China, and the high-tech industry and so forth. And so I started, at the time I was reading a book about the history of stock photography, and that brought me to Bill Gates. So Bill Gates bought in 1989, he was obviously a visionary. He bought what's called the Bettman Archive, which was at the time one of the largest stock image repositories in the world. It was 16 million images, cultural images, etchings, all kinds of things, so that magazines and advertisers and schools and so forth could buy images and license them to put in their books or and whatnot. And so Gates, as he was developing the computer software, he was thinking to the future, like, how could I deliver culture and imagery directly through the computer, so there actually nothing physical has to take place. And so here's an image. It's basically the cultural memory of the United States and the world, in a sense. This is a picture that's in the Bettman Archive, which is a photograph of the Kennedy assassination. Gives you a sense of the scope of the images. And so Bill Gates, once he bought this, he moved it to a mine in Pennsylvania called Iron Mountain, where the images could be stored at sub-zero temperatures, and so they could last much longer. And so it was a preservation thing. And so it was interesting, this moment of trying to take the physical analog world of photographic images, a kind of a cultural heritage, and then digitize it. And all of a sudden it sort of becomes, bits and pixels, and it's no longer, you know, silver on a piece of gelatin. And so that really interested me because rare earth elements were minerals that are going to be used to produce camera sensors and lenses and electricity. And so I thought, maybe I could do something with this. So I decided to do stock photography. So I put out a call to ethnically Mongolian actors and performers in Baotou and told them I wanted to do a commercial stock photo shoot. And so I based on what I imagined the keywords would be about a kind of burgeoning economy. So there's a big tourist economy there where a lot of the youth go and perform in traditional Mongolian clothes and sing Mongolian songs and wrestle and race horses. So it's got that sort of performance of culture thing going on there. You could sleep in a yurt and drink horse milk and things like that. Then thinking about kind of almost like propaganda imagery of the different stages of society, you know, the doctor, the worker, the soldier, also technology meeting traditional culture. Here's a picture of a Mongolian man on his laptop, or families coming together, you know, when they're back from their military service. A lot of what I learned about how the chemical runoff from the rare earth elements, it was producing health problems, cancers and bone diseases, made the government spend a lot of money on hospitals in Baotou, so health industry was a booming economy in that area as well. People who would design wind turbine farms or electric cars for suburban families. So the idea was to produce these images and think about how could stock photography also function with a valence of documentary, or and so what I wanted to do, what I ended up doing was so Getty Images bought Corbis from Bill Gates in 2011, I think, and so and then a Chinese media company bought Getty Images. So the largest repository of stock images is a Chinese company that licensed it to Getty Images. So I licensed my images to Getty Images and made them available at a low non-royalty price. So you could buy this picture of a worker that I made for $2.90 or $29 a month. And so I would put in the keywords, things that I felt like could potentially lead people to understand the political context. Like I would put in, you know, even though it's not obvious, rare earth elements, mining, extraction, Mongolian culture, cultural heritage, and so forth, as keywords. And some of that would get censored out by the software or the editors at Getty, but I was kind of hoping that that might be a sort of Trojan horse that goes along with the image. But I was also interested how the image would be used by other people. So it was kind of like an image virus sort of going out into the world. So I think that's all I'm going to say about Rare Earth Element Image Bank.
Did you end up selling the image?
Yeah, some of the images were sold, but they, when you do, it's called iStock. Before I became an artist, I was a commercial photographer, and so I had a little experience with stock photography. When Getty first started, I did some shoots for Getty, and at that time you could make, you know, if somebody bought your picture for a Mitsubishi ad, you could make a few $1,000s. This one is like an app that you put on your phone, and anybody could upload an image, and as long as they have a modeling release or a property release, it can be sold. But it's sold at such a low price that they don't even start paying you until you break $500. And I don't think I ever received a check from them. So some of these sold, but I don't know where they went.
Do you want to start talking about this one? Okay. Well, I don't know about all this stuff.
That's just read it. It's good. So.
Oh, there's a text on it. Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk about this project that we worked on, stray dog hydrophobia, and it's about, I guess, just the backstory in how we got into this subject is, you know, David was working on this project about mining and rare earth elements, and I was working on a collaboration about the oceans, and And I came across this story about, them writing the regulations about deep sea mining and wanting to begin it. And I thought we hadn't collaborated for many years, so I was like, oh, maybe this is actually a subject matter that we could, both work on and have, kind of an interest in it. And so, I asked, oh, do you think we should work on this? And we decided to start working on it, and one of the things that we learned was that the United Nations has the International Seabed Authority, which is a group that is writing the rules and regulations for deep sea mining. I think it's been around for like 40 years, and it's based in Kingston, Jamaica. And so it was in the news because they were having an upcoming session where the member states were, writing the rules, but they had this one rule in it that if any of the member states, wanted to push for mining, that it would trigger a vote by all the members. And so this small island nation, I think it was Nauru, is that right? Nauru, they wanted to start mining. They're very poor, and their island, was already decimated by mining the land part, so they wanted to, mine the waters around them. And so, which they're entitled to do. And which they're entitled to make the decision because it's, within their in their boundaries. And so this triggered this vote that was coming up. I think it was 2 years ago at this point. And so we decided that we wanted to go and, see what this UN conference was. And so through my collaborator on my last project, we met the director of TBA 21, and it's an art organization that has an ocean initiative. And they happened to have an observer seat at this UN ISA conference, and they allowed us to tag along and be observers with them. And so we were able to go to Jamaica to attend this conference. And what is this? I can read. Oh yeah, why don't you read that?
As we started to do research about this, we kind of went into it not knowing much, being very ignorant or naive about deep sea mining as a technology and an industry, but also the legal things. So they're writing what was called the Law of the Sea. The Law of the Sea was in 2 different congresses of the UN in the 78, I think in 84. And that was an update to what was called the Law of the High Seas. And there, you go back in history this is one of the first documents from 1690, which was a lawyer from the Netherlands was hired by the Dutch East India Trading Company to write a pamphlet called Mare Liberum, in which he made a case for free trade because the Portuguese had a monopoly on trading with the Far East, and the Dutch wanted to get in on that market. And so this is a quote from it. "The air belongs to this class of things for 2 reasons. First, it is not susceptible to occupation, and second, it is common use. Its common use is destined for all men. For the same reasons, the sea is common to all, because it is so limitless that it cannot become a possession of anyone, and because it is adapted for the use of all, whether we consider it from the point of view of navigation or of fisheries." So it kind of gets to the heart of it, like what do you do? How can you write a law that governs the world's largest commons, right? Which is the high seas, or in the Law of the Sea they call it the area. This again from that historical research, that kind of looking at why is the International Seabed Authority in Kingston, Jamaica, a friend of ours, Meredith Martin, who's an art historian, got us turned on to this art collector and doctor named Hans Sloane, who was the doctor to the governor of Jamaica in the end of the 17th century. He also was a budding naturalist, and he made this huge collection of natural species, of plants and animals and rocks and different things, and created his own natural history. We'll get into him a bit later, but what you see here is kind of the cabinet of curiosities illustrated within his home. When he died, he was very rich. He wound up becoming the physician to the king. He spent a lot of money on collecting all over the world, and his art and collections became, was bought by the state and became the foundation of the British Museum. And so the other narrative, so we're going to have to pull these things together. We've got the sort of the law of the sea and this international legal body. We have Hans Sloane, which is sort of British colonialism, the slave trade, sugar production in Jamaica in the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries. In the 19th century, after the abolition of slavery, there was an expedition to lay infrastructure for underground sea cables for the telegraph. And a military ship was commissioned and scientists were put on it. It was called the HMS Challenger. Some of you probably heard of the deepest part of the ocean is called Challenger Deep. It's named after that expedition where they would go, and this is an image of them sounding, where they would send down a device to measure the depth and also to dredge up things from the seabed. And so when they were dredging up the seabed, they discovered that the Pacific had this huge quantity of these little balls. Like they said they were like cricket balls. They were just scattered all over the bottom. So everywhere they would dredge in the Pacific, they would find these. And they realized that they were manganese primarily. That's the thing. These are polymetallic nodules, and they contain minerals that are useful for the transition to an electrical economy. Do you want to talk for a little bit?
I guess maybe, so that's sort of the backstory for the project and the historical information. And those of you that watched the video, I guess maybe we could just talk a little bit about how we organized the video and this kind of information, like, the very layered elements of, the sea itself, the elements, the history, the relationship between Jamaica and the empire, and also science. And so these are books of the law of the sea at, in Jamaica. Yeah, at the library. These are boxes from the it's the British Natural History Museum in London that holds a lot of the collection from the original expedition of the Challenger. And so there's rows and rows of the polymetallic nodules, and this is a model of the ship that was in Jamaica. So we kind of broke down the project into sort of 5 loose categories. And again, if you think back to Flotsam Jetsam and all the kind of loose elements in it, that working in documentary, but also in an experimental way, and coming upon things and filming them. So the categories that we kind of loosely worked with to organize all this information is music, and music as resistance, Jamaica as a place and the history of slavery and extraction, and then England and science, and then the idea of the law of the sea, and also this governing body, and then above and below water. So actually, the material of water and the immersion below and above it.
So the person you're seeing here and in the next slide, these are, so the woman is a composer who worked with us on the score for the film, who has a lot of interest in Afro-Caribbean music, and I think her father is Trinidadian, and so we brought her. She came with us to Jamaica a second time to work with local musicians, and we were visiting the Bob Marley Museum of all places, and there was a little stand to the side where this man in the center with the Rasta hat was where he hangs out and talks to people and sells some herbs and clothes and things like that. And we learned that it was actually Bongo Herman, who is a celebrated musician in Jamaica, who toured with Bob Marley on a lot of his world tours, and he plays traditional drum. And we asked him if he could collaborate with us to make some songs. And so the song that he made in collaboration with us and with our composer Yasna comes from traditional African rhythms, and it's called Ayabingi, and we learned about that rhythm, that it was a kind of a song of resistance. And we also wanted to think about a group that we had met on our first trip. Greenpeace had collaborated for an action against the beginning of deep sea mining with a group of people from the Maroon community in Charlestown in Jamaica. And Maroon communities are descendants of Africans who were enslaved, who, when they arrived in the Jamaica or other parts of the Americas, escaped from their captors and then lived as fugitives or independent, free men and women, and so they were recognized by the British as an independent community, and they're considered indigenous community within Jamaica. And we also went to work with them and filmed them because we wanted to feature them because of their activism in regards to the deep sea mining.
And also, this is Uncle Saul, who was in the video, and he is a Pacific Islander indigenous activist. And there's one moment in the video, he's invited by Greenpeace, and he stands up and during all the activities where they're, very like talking about the minutia of language, he stands up and does this traditional sort of a welcoming chant, Oli, talking about like coming together in this space, and welcoming everyone, but also talking about his ancestry as being from the bottom of the ocean. So in some ways, like how sound, with all these musicians, with Yasna, with Uncle Saul, how sound comes before language, how sound like penetrates our bodies and, also can connect us. And how he was trying to do that within this body that's very much about thinking about language and language's, relationship to, controlling or capturing, in terms of thinking about the law of the sea. So the next section is about science and, thinking about animals that, live on other materials. Like this was, a scientist working with bryozoans, which are, like invertebrates that will live on anything. So thinking about that in relation to the collection of specimens from Hans Sloane from back in Jamaica and making that connection.
Just go back. This is. We were able to go into the Hans Sloane collection. So the Natural History Museum in London has his original pressings of all the plants that he collected when he was there. And they open up to allow for researchers and collaborators. There was, at the time, we heard from the curator that there was a British artist who was looking into his seed collection, because a lot of the things that he learned about local plants, he kind of got that knowledge and information from enslaved women who were using natural plants for healing and medicines and so forth. And so this artist had found what medicines were used by the African women in Jamaica to induce abortion so that they didn't have to produce children to become enslaved as well. So there's a lot of sort of post-colonial engagement with this archive, and that plant is actually the sugar cane plant, which was the biggest crop for the country.
Maybe I'll just skip to this. Okay. So another big element in the project, there's two things shown here. There's one with a lid, a disposed lid that has text on it, and we used a lot of language in this work, using phrases from poetry, from the law of the seas, from different theorists writing about the deep sea. And sort of inserted that in this particular image, is inserting it in relation to objects that fell into the ocean during an earthquake in 1692. So thinking about submergence and language and these objects together, but also how language, inserted can in some ways disrupt or make clear, or kind of just give a moment, to think about what is happening.
What you see there, here's some more of the objects. So that the earthquake and tidal wave happened in Port Royal, which is was the city before Kingston, Jamaica, and was where a lot of British buccaneers, like pirates, would clean their ships, and they lived there. So there was a lot of human trafficking and prostitution and trading in stolen goods from Spanish galleons and so forth. So when the earthquake came, half of the town sunk into the water because it was built on a sandbar. And so they've excavated this town, and these are some of the objects that are now in the museum in Kingston. But on the upper right image here, you see these targets painted on plates. And so we wound up working with garbage and detritus that we collected on the beach. In the case of the bottom right side, barrel lid. But on the top, we've got this sort of melamine and plastic plates that we bought at Chinese owned haberdasheries in Kingston. And then we use them to paint these targets and these phrases on. And the target comes from this device called a Secchi disc. Anybody who's studied marine biology it's used to measure the turbidity of water, so you know how much silt and so forth are in the water. And so that became a kind of I guess an allegory or metaphor for us about deep sea mining, because the idea of sucking up all these nodules from the bottom of the sea, along with all the animals that are living on them, and then chopping it up to turn it into separate minerals and ores, and then spitting the silt back into the ocean would make the water more turbid and less clear and less clean. And so we're kind of thinking about that, like what is our vision on this place we can't visit? What can we actually see and what's not seeing? What is the opacity or the clarity of the water?
Yeah, one of the things before we started working on the project, we were doing the research on the law of the seas, but also that we were in touch with an environmental philosopher named Susan Reed, and she sent us this article where she's writing about the rights of the beings that are at the bottom of the ocean, and she has this term. She has a couple terms, but one of them is called flesh waste. And often when we think about water columns, we separate it as just being water, but actually water is mixed with living and non-living beings. It's if you think about a column of water, it's not just pure water, but it's like especially at that depth where everything that's living on the surface where there is light, it all slowly drifts down to the bottom of the ocean and eventually rests at the bottom of the ocean. But on its way down, it creates a turbidity in the depths where where she terms it flesh waste. It's like the bodies of all the living things broken down into what they term marine snow, but that you cannot separate the living and the non-living, and water as, a pure element in itself. So that was kind of the idea that we started, with when we moved into this project. And so a lot of the things, I think, come from that kind of ethos of not knowing and, the idea of turbidity, and thinking about, what it means, like what are the rights of, these beings that are at the bottom of the ocean.
I'll jump ahead a little bit.
Yeah, we're almost out of time.
So one of the ways that the industry, objectifies nature and the more than human is to kind of come up with convenient images for it. So one of the head of the metals company, which is one of the largest mining companies that was trying to work with Nauru to begin mining, and now that company is trying to work with Trump to get Trump to allow to fund them to mine minerals. Is that they called it, it's like, oh, the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, there's no life there. It's just like a field of potatoes, like or actually the guy from the Canadian Metals Company calls it, it's like a driving range. There's just golf balls out there. We're just gonna go suck them up, and then we're gonna solve the climate crisis. And so a lot of it is branding that oversimplifies the complexity of the situation and how we know so little about the ocean and its relationship to our environment.
And so we sort of took that theme of the potato or, the root vegetable or these other, things that come from the earth and, they become characters in the piece. And at the very end, there's a swimming cucumber as well in the underwater moment. We don't have a lot of time, but I'm gonna just show a couple images of like us sort of preparing, because it's a full channel piece, but it's also an installation. So we took apart our garage, and we used the leftover wood to build this structure, which was based on the human nervous system, and that relates to the title of Stray Dog Hydrophobia in relation to rabies, like thinking about the human nervous system. And we also went to visit scientists, or scientists that ran collections that had fish. Like large fish collections and invertebrates collections. This is it's scripts. And we borrowed specimens as part of the exhibition to make these chakras. And so these are drawings for like, dragonfish that they lent us from the collection. So it's also about a collaboration of all these different, entities. And we work with students at San Jose State University who blew glass and also made ceramics out of earth to hold these specimens. So this has deep sea dragonfish. It also has the actual polymetallic nodules that we borrowed from scripts, as well as porcelains. And they're all kind of, embedded together. And here's another display of a chakra that has invertebrates. That's a basket star and some polycate worms. And the installation was built with this wood and with the spinning plates that you see in the video in this like room-size installation with the video embedded sort of within it. This is one iteration. We'll do another iteration this fall at Art Center in Pasadena. Okay, so one last, we're a little over time, but I'm just gonna talk a little bit about one project that I worked on. I was invited to make something for this exhibition at the Met called Monstrous Beauty a couple years ago. Iris Moon asked me, it's all about the history of porcelain. So it's called Monstrous Beauty, a feminist revision of chinoiserie. And if you don't know, so chinoiserie is a movement, but it's also like the European fascination and desire for Eastern Chinese porcelain during a certain period. Maybe it's like the 17th and 18th centuries. But her show was about this history of porcelain and thinking about how we could, reimagine chinoiserie. And so porcelain was invented in China, and it was kind of like a secret how it was made. And Europeans, they were like kings, they were like fascinated by it. They were totally obsessed by it, because true porcelain, when you hold it up, you can see through it. It's luminous, and somehow the luminosity is related to, being close to God, which kings were close to God. So there was something very magical about it for them, and they wanted to possess it. And in fact, there was kings that worked with alchemists to try to come up with the recipe to create porcelain, because of course alchemists were trying to create gold out of nothing. But the closest thing they come up with was porcelain, which they eventually did create a recipe for, and they sold it and thus made gold. But so there was this whole period where the beginning of the relationship between the West's encounter with the East was through this exoticized material. And so in thinking about how this origin of contact then comes into the present day, in terms of the relationship of desire, of the exotic, and in particular, the way that Asian women's bodies are framed. So she asked me to be in the show, and she went through all the pieces, like all these, historical pieces in the show, to tell me what it was about. And she's like, yeah, I want to have some contemporary art in it. So I saw this piece, and this is like a tulip vase. They call it a flower pyramid, and it's from like 1700s. I want to say it's the late 1700s. I don't remember the exact date. But if you can see, okay, so it's kind of like a tower, and it's about my height. And at the very top, there's a bust of a lady, and that's Mary, Queen Mary. She was obsessed with porcelain, but she's at the top. And then underneath, there's all these holes where you poke a single flower in it, and they're all the way down to the bottom. And if you take a closer look, you'll see that there's these these things. And when I first saw it digitally, I was like, oh, those are heads. And you actually put the flower into the mouth. And something about that, and at first when I saw it digitally, I thought they were women's heads. And something about it really disturbed me. It was kind of a very visceral reaction. Thinking about, the queen on top and, all of these, basically the multitudes of people, below her where her, physically where it's like the shape of a skirt, and at the very bottom, it's hard to see, but there's like these animals, these sea animals, these chimeras. And so one of the things I was thinking about was, when you're putting your flower inside this head, what is the person looking at? What is the head looking at? And so this is what it looks like close up. And so when we went to the V&A when we were doing research on this deep sea mining project, and we saw the actual piece, and I took a picture from above, and in fact, the figure is, looking up at you as you place this single flower into its mouth. So my project that I ended up coming up with, the project that I wanted to do for this exhibition was a massage table completely made out of porcelain. And so I ended up making it at the Kohler factory, which is just two hours from here, up in Kohler, Wisconsin. This is an image of the factory. And it is, it's the first time I had been into an industrial manufacturing space, but I found it really interesting thinking about, the use of their porcelain, which is a vitreous porcelain, and how this porcelain that they're making is something we're in contact with every single day, like our butts, our hands, our whole bodies when we take a bath or, go to the bathroom, right? So the reason why I wanted to make a massage table out of porcelain was in just thinking about this trajectory of chinoiserie, from the centuries ago when the kings were desiring porcelain and wanting to, actually possess it, to the present day, and over COVID, when there was a lot of Asian hate and the murder of spa workers at the massage spa, Young's massage spa in Atlanta, Georgia. And so I wanted to make this massage table out of porcelain. So when I was trying to sell my idea to them, I couldn't really make my sketch. And so I put it in AI that I wanted to make a massage table out of blue and white porcelain, which is like the traditional, kind of what comes to mind when we think about porcelain. And so it came up with all these strange iterations, and I told him I wanted a hole in it because I was really interested in that hole in the flower vase, right? The idea of the entry, and the interior and the exterior. And what's really interesting is that when they pour porcelain in the Kohler factory, this is me and Corey, who was my project manager there, they use funnels. And so we made casts and funnels. These are publicity images that they want to take. And this is actually Laura Kohler, the owner of Kohler, standing there watching as we pour into this mold. And here you can see, the funnel and the fluid entering into the body of the cast, the mold.
What wasn't there also it's making me think of you told me about how they had to force feed the suffragettes.
Yeah, right. So the funnel and the mouth reminded me of force feeding and hunger strikes, and how that is also forcing the autonomy of the female body, and forcing people to eat, and so this form itself I thought was really interesting, and the form of the funnel and the hole, and this is how it was cast. It was one of the largest things that they cast. The urinal is actually heavier that they make, but in order to flip it, after you'd flip it. It took like four very large people to flip it over and then open it up, and then it was textured. And this is the image of the table itself, and we're installing it in the Met. But one of the things that I wanted to retain was the idea of the holes and the protrusions, and so you can see here that the legs themselves have holes, and then the surface has the face hole, which is you would put your face in, but it also has these other holes along the body, and this is an image of the face hole and how it's textured to look very realistic, with the stitching and everything. But then when you get to these holes in the body itself, it creates this illusion that there is actually no body underneath it. So the first reaction is that it's three-dimensional, it's a hole, but as you come closer, the holes, give a sense of there being nothing underneath. This is a side image to show the stitching. But if you were to go to kneel down and look underneath, the bottom is glazed with cobalt. The top is completely raw porcelain, so it's very rough, and it's also stark, like kind of a white, gray white, almost like bone. But if you go underneath, then it's this very dark, glossy, material that you can't really focus on. And the piece is called abyssal, and abyssal is a word that was invented during the oceanic times, when the British started exploring the ocean. So abyssal, fathom, abysmal, they're all these oceanic terms. And of course, they describe a space that we can never go to. And so this piece, after the exhibition is done, I plan to sink it into the bottom of the ocean. I guess this is something that links maybe the project before and also my project about abyssal. So these are porcelains from the Khao Mau shipwreck. And so, porcelain was traveling in these wooden boats around the world during this period before they had Doppler, before they knew anything about weather patterns. And so they would kind of hug the coast, and they were at the mercy of the weather, right? As we know, weather is very unpredictable. And so a lot of ships sank off the coast. And so a lot of porcelain in the world is actually at the bottom of the ocean. And so for this particular shipwreck, there was a fire on board in the kitchen, and so, you know, when you're making ceramics, those of you that know, you put it in a kiln and it fires and it hardens, right? So what happens is when there's another fire, it becomes a second firing. So as the fire happened, it heated up all the porcelains, they fused together, and then they sunk to the bottom of the ocean and then split, you know, because they broke from the impact. And over, you know, time, hundreds of years, you know, animals start growing on this porcelain, you know, bryozoans, like, you know, we showed before from the other project, corals, worms. And so there's a theorist, and what's his name, the theorist? Kelley and Quigley. He writes about this. These are from the V&A, and actually the V&A titles them, when you look at the wall text, sea sculptures, like that's their name for them. So he actually proposes that these are a multi-species co-creation between humans and all these sea animals. So my idea is after the show is done, it's done this summer, that it's going to travel to California, hopefully, fingers crossed, and to the Monterey Bay, where this is the Marine Lab for Stanford. It's called Hopkins Marine Station. And it's on Monterey Bay. It's literally right next to the Monterey Bay Aquarium. But in the late 1800s, it was a Chinese fishing village. And in 1906, the village was burned down, and the residents were not allowed to return to rebuild. And this was happening all over the West in Chinatowns, where, you know, they were burning them to drive, you know, the Chinese out. It's like the same thing happening all over again, right? Over and over again. But there's a very strong descendant community there, and my idea is to take it and sink it outside the marine station in order to be a substrate to grow sea organisms. And so, yeah, so hopefully that'll happen. And I think that's it, because we've talked for a long time. Thank you so
much. We were given an hour and a half, and we intentionally kind of keep our talk down to a little over an hour so we could have a conversation with you. So if anybody has any thoughts, comments, or questions, please.
Hi, thank you. My name is Christine. You guys clearly have a lot of ideas that go into your projects, like so many layers of meaning, and it feels like you're pulling from a lot of different ideas. I was wondering what clearly you are able to distill it into a clear project and like a multi-layered projects, but what does your ideation process look like for creating these ideas?
Yeah, I guess I'll just start a little bit. I mean, I had mentioned before when we were talking about the first project, Flotsam, and how we kind of entered it, you know, with this, entered into our collaboration in a way, into these spaces of not knowing and just, you know, allowing things to kind of emerge, and, you know, there's no wrong answer at any time. I think that's also actually really interesting about collaborating when there's multiple people, because for me, it's I feel like sometimes with my individual work, I really struggle and hard on myself about getting the idea right or getting the material right. But I feel like, you know, with a collaboration, I'm just fuck it, there's another person, we can just do something, you know? So there's this opening of you know, starting with just letting everything kind of filter in, and then seeing the things that we are drawn to and that lead us, you know? So yeah, there's material, there's history, there's reading, there's text-based research, but there's maybe also material research, there's physical research, going somewhere and trying to, you know, feel something, feel a place. There's all of those kind of things. and then it's sort of like what takes us, or, you know, like what strikes us. And I think it's probably different for how it strikes you than how it strikes me. Like, I often feel like when something feels like something I need to do, like I feel very uncomfortable. And I, you know, like I just kind of feel like uncomfortable and a little bit sick. You know, like, and I know it's like, oh, that's actually the way we should, you know, like, and like there's an excitement in that discomfort that this is where we should, you know, start investigating.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I realized that if I could think about what kind of artist I am or how I approach art, you know, I'm not like a discipline-specific person. You know, I don't master any one craft. I think of myself more as a kind of producer in a sense. Like I get interested in an idea and I know I want to make a project about it. I tend to go towards the photographic arts like film and video and photography, or ready-made. I just kind of have to have an openness to what's out there, right? Like that the concept, if I read enough and talk to enough people and kind of visit places and talk and meet people and have an experience, that it'll start to cohere, and then I can find a form that makes sense for the idea. But it's not fun, you know. It's like because it's sort of like, how long is this going to take, and how much time or money do I have to do this, and you know, and sometimes it's good to have a deadline. But yeah, it's a lot of not knowing and sort of struggling with, you know, whether or not it's even worth doing. But yeah, so, and it is like, you're right, you know, it's that classic, like people describe this for, you know, the funnel style of creation, where you start with this huge, it's really wide, the net is cast wide, and then there's so much stuff, and it needs to be filtered down to a point, and so it just takes time.
Hello. Hi. Hi, Patty.
How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you.
Oh my God, I've seen you forever.
I know. So I've been spending time with Flotsam Jetsam, and because in preparation for the colloquium tomorrow, and I noticed that there was this scene, the conversation between the two people about the imaginary and submersion and abstraction. And it repeats itself, like it's first comes up in the middle of the film, and then it's like again at the end. And I was curious to hear why the repetition and what happens with the repetition.
Do you want to take that?
Well, I mean, first of all, so one thing we tried for that film, you know, I said we were kind of doing this Brechtian sort of documentary type thing where we had the psychotherapy session to write the script with the actors, and then we had these two characters who were actually professional actors that we hired from Hong Kong that we thought of as our surrogate egos. Like they stood in for us and had the kind of meta conversation. And so I think that language came from like our conversations when we were asked to make a script for the film. We're like, well, what have we been talking about? And a lot of it was about just kind of trying to describe the project to ourselves. Like, what does it mean for your home to be buried in water? What does it mean to be separated forever from a place that's familiar? What is, you know, is that an abstraction? Is memory an abstraction? Is landscape an abstraction? You know, so it was a kind of a lot of our sort of meta conversations that we did over and over again together. And yeah, I don't know if I have a great answer for why it repeats itself. I guess we're just sort of thinking about it as a kind of an iterative mantra of like trying to understand the project in the process of making the project.
I mean, I guess what I would add to about the repetition is because video is a time-based medium, you know, you start in one place, and then as you experience the piece, it's changing. And so like you hear it once, and sometimes, I don't know, like I find that if I hear something again, in another context, it changes just slightly, or I take it in a little more. And so, I don't know, I sort of feel like, I'm trying to remember, it's been a long time, but I feel like returning that statement, returning that text, because it's a voiceover in the second one, right? Like it's another scene, is that right? Like I feel like the first time they're saying it, and the second time it's like passing through the lock. So you see like people working on the ship, and then the camera's just kind of panning around, and then you hear that line. So it's in a totally different context. Like first it's embodied by people, then it's kind of embodied by this space, of the locks, which is how you like descend and, like go up and down. And I don't know, just thinking about that in that descension space and, or the other way around, right? Like, that sort of moving.
And I think now I'm in that space. The crew for the ship are taking a nap, and on the wall are these landscape paintings of the Three Gorges. So the Three Gorges was this famous, beautiful spot in China that poets and painters went to, and then after the dam came, it sort of changed it, right? It industrialized it, and so. I think we were also thinking about landscape as an abstraction, like the idea of traditional Chinese landscape painting as an abstraction, that it's something that lives in your imagination or your heart.
Because if you think of it in terms of like the captain sleeping and they're dreaming, and then they're moving through this, they're descending or elevating into a space that's filled and then unfilled with water. But then also the Three Gorges Dam, which is so famous of a landscape, but then it's like, it's gone. It's like people can't go there anymore. It's like represented in paintings and in poems and language, but it's actually not a space you can re-enter.
Thanks. I was thinking about how you were describing a lot of your projects as being collaborations, and it's really clear that you're like, as much as you're following new subject matters, you're also working with musicians, or you're working with the opera singers, or you're working with the porcelain makers, and all of those seem kind of like integral parts of the project, that it's also about connecting with the scientists or connecting with the archivists. And I'm wondering if you're thinking about that as sort of like, are you building, are you kind of like accruing a bunch of sort of like comrades around the world that you're going to be working with, like as you keep doing this? Or is it like, this project is about my working with these people, and the next project will be about finding new people to be working with?
I think, I really enjoy I said that it's hard and not fun sometimes to be in these projects. I guess more when you're alone, you're trying to figure it out. But when you're actually gotten to the point where you're like, okay, turn the camera on, and you've got this crew together, that's really wonderful because it's communal and you're making something together with people, and I really enjoy that. I think it doesn't necessarily, at least for me, hasn't repeated, but I'm not going to say it's not going to happen in the future, because I do admire filmmakers like Cassavetes, who, or others who have worked with the same actors over and over again, and you develop these relationships. I think that's really wonderful. But Patty's been a kind of a long-term collaboration. Maybe she could talk about.
Yeah, we collaborate in so many different ways and so many different capacities with different people, and so I think it's like each collaboration is different, and some may be repeated, but some may not, depending on the themes. Like I'm in a long-term collaboration with a scientist and an ecofeminist writer, and so we, have, and people enter that realm and they disappear. Like Sue Reed, who I mentioned, she was one of our, researchers on the project, but she is also, the person that informed us on, the deep sea mining project. And then, for instance, like Ben Frabel from Scripps, who we worked with for, the specimens for the chakras at the San Jose Museum of Art. I've returned to ask him questions about other specimens, and I don't know, I think that working with people just opens a door to maybe meeting them again, and I think that's that's a nice part about it, but it's not like it's an open door. not like a contract.
Yeah.
Oh, there's somebody here.
Here, I can give you one.
Yeah, you can take that.
Okay, but I'll give it right back. Okay. I appreciated this talk tonight because you were able to share both your collaboration together, but your individual practices. And so it was fun as I was listening to you and thinking about what aspects you might have brought to these collaborative projects where you were working together. And I was curious how you initially started working together, like what drew you guys to each other, and how that relationship blossomed in the beginning.
Well, it was in the 90s, and I had moved to New York, and I was working. I had this roommate, and I was going to do my first gallery show, and it was live performance, but I was thinking to work in video and photography. And so my roommate was like, oh, I know this person who's got a photo business. And we had actually kind of been friends. And he's like, you should just ask David, And so we started working together. We were, friends in this kind of group, but then started working together on these photographs. So I did performance, and he was working in photography. And so we made these, images for this exhibition. So then that was the very first, that was like in the mid-90s or something.
Yeah.
It was a very long time ago.
It was, and that was interesting because Patty had these live performances that she had been doing since coming to New York. And I was doing photography and had my own both commercial and kind of documentary fine art practice. And, figuring out how to make one image stand in for a whole performance was a real challenge. I think we had to kind of figure out what action or gesture would make a compelling photograph that could stand on its own, because I think documentation of performance is often really, it's like a black and white camera with the audience in the front or whatever. And so we did it in a studio, which was Patty's living room in her apartment, and and I think made some good photographs.
And then many years later, like 7 years, no, it wasn't that long. It was maybe 4 or 5 years later. I got some money, I got a grant, and then I was like, I want to go really far away, and the place I wanted to go was this place in China that changed its name to Shangri-La, and it was like a tourist thing, and then so David and I went together, and that's when we started just in a space that neither one of us knew, and kind of figuring out what was there and what the place was about.
Yeah, because it was. Neither of us had worked like that. Patty had been doing performance videos, which were more kind of studio-based or live performance, and I was doing photography, both kind of editorial photography and then documentary photography.
Set up editorial photography, but also some documentary photography, like black and white stuff too,
Yeah.
right? So it was very different,
Yeah.
but.
So we spent 3 months in the mountains in China just figuring out how to do the project. So that was the kind of the origins of making bigger videos that were more collaborative.
Please join me in thanking Patty and David.
Thank you.